Hi, you're on the Reddit Confessions channel. There were two names on the cake. That's how it began. That's what snapped me out of whatever daydream I'd been stuck in for the last year of my marriage. Not some lipstick on a shirt or a suspicious text. Just a cake, sitting in our fridge, with two names written in blue and gold frosting. Happy birthday, Darla and Noah. I stood there holding the fridge door open with one hand, the other shaking like I just touched something electric. Noah? Who the hell was Noah? Darla had told me she wasn't doing anything big this year. Too much going on at work, she said. Maybe just wine with Jasmine or a movie night. She made it sound so dull that I didn't even bother planning anything for her. I just got her a gift card for a bookstore she never actually goes to, because I'm apparently that kind of husband. But there it was. A cake. And a name. Not mine. When she came home that night, I didn't say a word. I didn't ask. I didn't accuse. I just watched her open the fridge, glance at the cake, and freeze for a split second. The kind of freeze only guilty people do, when they realize they left the murder weapon on the dining table. Then she laughed. Oh, that's for my coworker. We're doing a joint celebration at the office tomorrow. I nodded. I even smiled like a fool. But in my chest, something collapsed. Quietly, like a folding chair in the rain. She went upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the cake like it might offer me a better explanation. The next day, I followed her. Not in a creepy trenchcoat kind of way. I just called out sick, grabbed my keys, and drove 10 minutes behind her. She wasn't headed to her office. She was headed to the Harbolite Club, a place we'd once looked at for our wedding reception. Too fancy, too expensive, too not us, she'd said. Apparently it was them now. I parked across the street and watched her walk in, holding that same cake, smiling, laughing, wearing a dress that hugged her body like it had been stitched on. I was still in my hoodie and old sneakers. I hadn't even brushed my hair. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe just her and coworkers singing badly under dim lights. But when I finally walked in through the side entrance, everything inside me cracked. The lights went off. The crowd screamed, "Surprise!" Confetti flew. And then the lights came on. There was Darla, wrapped around a man I'd never met, lips inches from his, both of them holding champagne. Everyone turned. She saw me. She froze. And then, silence. The moment her eyes met mine, the air felt like it had been vacuumed out of the room. Her smile collapsed mid-laugh, and her hand dropped from the man's chest like it had touched fire. That was Noah, I guessed, the second name on the cake. The man whose champagne glass clinked against hers a second earlier. Everyone had been cheering for them, the happy couple of the night. And yet, only one of us had a wedding ring on. The room full of party guests fell silent. You could hear the champagne bubbles popping, the soft hum of the speakers still playing a jazzy instrumental version of Happy Birthday. I stood there with a cheap gift bag in one hand, a book she said she wanted 3 years ago and probably forgot about, and my jaw clenched so tight I thought I'd crack a molar. Darla blinked like she'd seen a ghost. Then she stepped forward, her voice cracking as she said, "Vernon, I didn't know you were coming." Noah, tall and smug in his crisp shirt, turned to me with a condescending half-smile. "You must be Vernon," he said, like I was some neighbor who wandered in off the street. My stomach turned. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure what version of myself had made the decision to walk into that building. But it wasn't the Vernon who folds laundry on Tuesdays and brings her peppermint tea when she's sick. It was someone quieter, colder, someone who didn't cry in public, even if his entire chest felt like it had been ripped open in front of 50 strangers. "I'm her husband," I finally said. Not loud, not dramatic, just flat, matter of fact. That hit the crowd like a thrown plate. A woman in the back gasped. One guy near the bar whispered something and quickly looked away. Darla's face went pale, then red, then pale again. She rushed over. "Vernon, wait. I can explain." "No," I said, not because I had anything else to say, but because I knew she was about to lie, and I didn't think I could handle another one of her perfectly rehearsed, emotionally manipulative monologues. I'd heard enough over the years to recognize the rhythm before it even started. Noah casually stepped between us, like I was the one making a scene. "I think you should leave, man. You're embarrassing her." I almost laughed. Embarrassing her? She threw away our marriage like a paper cup and I was the embarrassment? I looked around. No one moved. No one defended me. Not even Jasmine, who had once cried at our wedding like it was her own. So I did the only thing I could. I reached into the gift bag, pulled out the book, Letters to a Loving Wife, and handed it to her like it was radioactive. "I bought this for you. I thought it'd remind you of us, of what we had." I paused. "But I think you've replaced that with Noah." Her lips trembled, and for a second, I saw the flicker of guilt. But it wasn't enough. It wouldn't fix anything. Not the secrecy. Not the shower whispers. Not the cake with 2 names. Then I turned to the door. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a meltdown. I just walked out, past the shocked faces, past the balloons and streamers, and into the cold night air, still holding the now empty gift bag, the one I had once filled with hope. I wish I could say I went home that night and collapsed in bed or cried into a pillow like people do in movies. But the truth? I drove aimlessly for hours, through neighborhoods I didn't recognize, past gas stations I'd never stopped at. At some point, I ended up at a 24-hour laundromat. I just sat there in my car across the street, watching the dryers spin through the glass, as if some stranger's clean laundry could somehow spin my thoughts back into order. It wasn't just the cheating. It wasn't just the lying. It was that I had no idea. I truly, pathetically, had believed everything was fine. That we were just in a quiet phase. That all couples go through lulls. I blamed the stress, her long hours at work, her sudden obsession with hot yoga and green smoothies. I thought it was a phase. Turns out, the phase was me and it had an expiration date. When I finally got home sometime after 2 a.m., the house was dark. Her car was in the driveway, which meant she'd beaten me back. I sat in the silence for a while before stepping inside. She was asleep or pretending to be, on the far edge of the bed. I didn't wake her. I couldn't even look at her. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She made toast. She asked me if I wanted eggs. I stared at her, trying to locate even a flicker of remorse on her face, but she was in full performance mode. It was terrifying how easy it was for her to shift gears. Maybe she'd been doing it for longer than I realized. I didn't answer. I just walked out of the kitchen, grabbed her laptop off the couch, the one she never let me touch, even though it technically belonged to both of us, and took it into the guest room. I'm not proud of it. I know I should have respected privacy, asked questions, had a calm conversation like adults do. But I was done being respectful. I was done playing the fool in my own marriage. The laptop wasn't password protected. Maybe she thought I'd never have the guts. Maybe she wanted me to find something. Maybe she just forgot. Either way, the first thing that opened was her browser, and the first tab was a private email account I'd never seen before. I clicked. There were dozens of messages. Some were from Noah. Some from other names I didn't recognize. But the tone was all the same. Flirty, explicit, mocking. One even had a subject line that read, "You should have seen his face today. Poor Vernon." I clicked that one last. Inside was a forwarded message from Darla. A screenshot of a conversation she and I had had a week earlier. She'd been sweet to me. I remembered the text. I thanked her for being patient with me while I worked late. She replied, "Always, baby. You're my home." But the caption she added when she sent it to Noah? "He really thinks this means something." Faced with tears of joy, I didn't move for a long time. I just stared at the screen. The blinking cursor. The invisible weight pressing down on my chest. I think that was the moment something inside me finally shut off. Not out of anger. Not even pain. Just emptiness. She knocked on the door a few minutes later. I minimized everything and opened it. She looked up at me, confused. "Why'd you take my laptop?" I looked her in the eyes and said, as calmly as I could, "I needed to know what I'm actually married to." She flinched like I'd slapped her. But I didn't give her time to respond. I walked past her and left the house. Again, I didn't know where to go after I left the house. I didn't have a plan, didn't pack a bag, Didn't even take my phone charger. I just drove. It was cloudy that day, thick gray skies with no sun, as if even the weather was trying to smother any flicker of clarity I had left. I ended up at a park we used to visit back when things were simple. We hadn't been there in years. She always said the geese were aggressive and the benches gave her splinters. I sat on one anyway. I don't know how long I sat there, honestly. Long enough for my legs to go numb and the sky to spit light rain. I checked my phone once. 12 missed calls from Darla. 1 from her sister. 3 voicemails, none of which I listened to. I wasn't ready to hear her voice, especially not if she was going to pretend this was all some big misunderstanding. I'd seen the messages, the screenshots, the jokes. I knew exactly what I was dealing with now. I just didn't know what I was supposed to do about it. By the time I returned to the house later that evening, the porch light was already on. And standing under it, arms crossed, wearing a thick purple shawl and a tight, disapproving look, was Darla's mother, Sharon. The woman who'd once told me, 3 months into dating her daughter, that I wasn't quite what she envisioned, but at least I was polite. She didn't say hello. She didn't smile. She marched right up to me and said, "Are you really airing your dirty laundry at a party in front of her friends and coworkers?" I blinked, stunned. "You mean the party I wasn't even invited to? The one where I caught your daughter with another man?" "She told me her side of things," Sharon said, her voice clipped and cold. "That you've been distant, depressed, unavailable, that you stormed in and made a scene, embarrassed her in front of people she has to work with." I laughed. Actually laughed, though there was no humor in it. "She made out with a man in front of a room full of people while still married to me. She says he's someone who actually listens to her," Sharon snapped back. "Someone who understands her. Maybe if you'd been more." "Stop," I said, sharper than I'd ever spoken to her before. "Just stop." There was a pause, a thick silence that stretched between us. Sharon's mouth opened like she had something else to say, but for once, nothing came out. I walked past her, unlocked the door, and went inside. I didn't invite her in. I didn't even look back to see if she stayed. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Darla wasn't there. Or maybe she was hiding in one of the rooms, hoping I'd calm down and sweep it all under the rug like always. But I didn't want calm. I didn't want excuses. I wanted her to understand the weight of what she'd done. I went into the bedroom, grabbed the box I kept in the back of the closet, the one with our wedding album, our honeymoon journal, the hotel keycard she'd insisted we keep, for memories. I sat on the floor and stared at it. The photos, the notes we'd written to each other, the promises. I didn't cry. I felt nothing. Not love, not hate. Just the hollow ache of someone who finally saw the truth too late. Then I pulled out a pen, grabbed one of the note cards from the journal, and wrote 6 words. "I hope he was worth it." I left it on her pillow. I barely slept that night. I kept hearing echoes in my head. Not voices, just memories. The kind that creep in when the world goes silent. Her laugh in the kitchen when she used to burn pasta and pretend it was al dente. Her hand brushing mine in movie theaters. Her whisper, "You're my forever." But now those moments felt stolen, like they belonged to a different lifetime. Or worse, like they had never been real to begin with. Around 4 a.m. I got up to get water and caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked like someone who had aged 10 years in 2 days. Eyes swollen, skin pale, a faint bruise on my temple from where I'd apparently hit the car door without noticing. That's how far gone I was. Walking through my own life like a stranger wearing my clothes. That morning I started packing. Not everything, just essentials. Some clothes, my laptop, chargers, a few books, the cheap shaving kit I bought on clearance years ago. I wasn't ready to leave the house permanently, but I couldn't keep existing in that place, surrounded by the smell of her perfume and the silence that buzzed like static between every room. I opened the guest closet to look for my old duffel bag, the one I used for road trips. It was buried under a pile of coats and boxes. As I reached for it, something heavy shifted behind the bags. A small lockbox fell to the floor with a metallic thud. We didn't keep anything valuable at home. At least, I didn't think we did. Curious, I picked it up. No label. Just a basic latch and a cheap lock that popped open with a firm press from a spoon handle. Inside were several envelopes, all bundled with a ribbon I instantly recognized. It was the one I had tied around her Valentine's gift 2 years ago. I should have stopped. I really should have. But something inside me pushed forward like I was chasing a ghost that refused to show its face. The envelopes were full of letters. Handwritten. Folded with care. Not from me. Every single one of them started with D. Some ended with N. And one, near the bottom, ended with, "I wish you'd just leave him already. He doesn't see you. But I do." And I read through them one by one. Months' worth of secret correspondence. References to nights in the cabin, our little restaurant by the pier, the red dress you wore for me. None of it included me. It was like reading pages torn from someone else's love story. Except the lead actress was my wife. In one letter, she confessed that she used to feel guilty, but the guilt faded over time. Another described a dream she had where she and Noah were on a beach, drinking wine, laughing, and I was nowhere in sight. She wrote, "It felt like peace. That one gutted me. She didn't just cheat. She fantasized about a world where I didn't exist. A world where I had already been erased, and she could live out some seaside romance with a man who saw her as an escape rather than a partner." I put the letters back, but I kept the last one. I needed it. Proof. Anchor. Reminder. 10 minutes later, I walked into the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, scrolling her phone, acting like everything was fine. Like the past few days hadn't been the slow-motion demolition of our marriage. I tossed the letter onto the table. She looked up. Her eyes scanned the page. Then she froze. "You left this in the closet," I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. "Thought maybe you'd want to keep it somewhere safer." She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "You had no right to go through my things." "Maybe," I replied. "But then again, you had no right to rewrite our life behind my back." She said nothing. I turned and walked out the front door without another word. After walking out the door that morning, I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't sit across from her at that kitchen table pretending anything resembled normal. I couldn't look at the woman I married and pretend I hadn't just held a letter in my hand where she dreamed of erasing me from her life. I ended up at my coworker Dean's place. A guy I barely talked to outside of work. I must have looked like a disaster when I knocked on his door unannounced. I had bags under my eyes, wrinkled clothes, a voice that cracked when I asked if I could crash on his couch for a few nights. He didn't ask many questions, which I was grateful for. Just handed me a spare key and tossed me a blanket. The next few days were a blur. I didn't go to work. I ignored my boss's emails. I turned my phone off entirely because it was blowing up with messages from Darla, her sister, even Jasmine, the same Jasmine who stood silent when I exposed everything at the party. They weren't checking in on me, though. The tone was clear. Darla's reputation had been damaged, and they wanted me to fix it by moving on quietly. I wish I could say I was surprised. But betrayal doesn't just reveal the cheater. It reveals everyone who helped them cover it up. It was Dean who finally said what I hadn't been willing to say out loud. We were sitting on his balcony eating greasy takeout when he asked, "Are you ever going to confront the guy?" I stared at him for a few seconds, unsure how to answer. "Noah," I finally asked. He nodded. "He gets to walk around thinking he's untouchable. You don't want to look him in the eyes at least once?" The idea haunted me that night. Not because I wanted a confrontation. I'm not the kind of man who yells or throws punches. I just needed to see him. I needed to know if the person Darla risked everything for was someone extraordinary or just another overconfident parasite who mistook my silence for weakness. So I drove to his workplace. Darla had mentioned it in one of her letters. He worked in real estate, some flashy firm downtown with an over-designed lobby that smelled like cologne and fake smiles. I walked in and asked the receptionist if he was available. She looked me up and down like I was a delivery guy with bad timing. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No," I said flatly. "But he'll want to see me." I didn't expect her to actually let me in. But 10 minutes later, Noah stepped out of the elevator looking smug, and polished in a blazer and crisp shirt. He didn't recognize me at first. Not until I said, "You kissed my wife at a party you thought I wouldn't show up to." His smile faltered, just for a second. Then he crossed his arms and said, "Oh, Vernon, right?" Like I was a character in a story he'd already finished reading. "I'm not here to fight you," I said, keeping my voice even. "I just want to know, did you know she was married the whole time?" He tilted his head, shrugged, then said, "She told me you were basically separated. Said you were more like roommates at this point." That line hit harder than I expected. Roommates. That's what she called me. That's how she rewrote me to make room for him. I nodded slowly. "And that made it okay?" He didn't respond, just looked at me with those cold, dismissive eyes. That was the moment I realized he didn't care. Not about me. Not about her. Maybe not even about the affair. To him, I was just a weak obstacle he'd already stepped over. Before I turned to leave, I said one more thing. "You think you've won something, but what you've really done is inherit a liar." I saw the flicker of doubt on his face then. Not enough to satisfy me, but enough to remind me that even parasites feel discomfort when you shine light on them. I walked out without looking back. I didn't need to, because for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. By the time I left Noah's office, something in me had changed. It wasn't some dramatic transformation. I didn't walk out with a puffed chest or a burning need for revenge. But for the first time, I saw my marriage for what it really was, a one-sided illusion held together by my silence. Darla had convinced herself she was the victim of a dull, predictable life. Maybe she believed it, but I was done living like I had to apologize for being the only one who stayed loyal. I went back to Dean's apartment and started drafting the paperwork that night. I'd never dealt with divorce papers before. Just looking at the templates online made me nauseous. But there was something strangely empowering about typing my name in the petitioner's box. For once, I wasn't waiting around for her to decide what I was worth. I was choosing myself. That probably sounds cliché. Probably is. But when you've spent years letting someone treat you like background noise, even the smallest choice feels like a rebellion. 3 days later, I returned to the house. I timed it so I knew she'd be home. I wanted her to see me walk in. No more avoiding each other like shadows in the same space. No more hiding in guest rooms. She was in the kitchen, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. She looked surprised to see me, but her expression quickly shifted into something cooler, more measured. "You look like you've made a decision," she said before I even opened my mouth. I placed the envelope on the table between us. "I have." She didn't reach for it immediately. She just stared at it like it was ticking. Then she said something that caught me off guard. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." "What did you think I'd do?" I asked. "Wait around while you played house with someone else? Pretend it didn't happen so your life didn't get messy?" "I thought you'd understand," she said softly, like that made it better. "We stopped connecting a long time ago." "No," I corrected her. "You stopped trying." I stayed. I showed up. I gave you everything I had. She leaned against the counter and folded her arms. "So now what? You divorce me and think everything gets better? You think that's strength?" I almost laughed at that. "No, Darla. I think finally leaving someone who disrespected me every day for years is the only strength I've got left." She finally opened the envelope and scanned the papers. Her hands trembled just slightly. "You already signed?" "Yeah," I said. I didn't want to give myself time to change my mind. She sat down slowly, the paper still in her hands. "What do you want from me now?" "Nothing," I said. "That's the point." We sat in silence for a long time. She didn't cry. I didn't either. That's what surprised me most. I thought I'd feel devastated. I thought this would be the moment I broke down, begged for a reason to stay, pleaded for some version of our old life back. But I didn't, because that version of us had died long before Noah ever showed up. I left the house that afternoon with one suitcase and a copy of the papers in my glove compartment. I didn't have a destination in mind, just the road, just the sound of my own thoughts finally not being drowned out by doubt. She texted me 2 weeks after I left. The message was short, almost casual. Can we talk? I feel like we left things open-ended. Open-ended. That's how she described the quiet collapse of a decade-long marriage. Like we were a TV show that forgot to air the final episode. I didn't respond. Not out of bitterness. Not even out of pride. I just didn't need anything from her anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for an apology, or an explanation, or some dramatic confession to make the pain feel meaningful. I had finally learned that closure isn't something you're given. It's something you create when you stop asking questions that have already been answered. I spent those weeks focusing on things I used to ignore. I started cooking again. For myself, not to impress anyone. I walked every morning before sunrise, just to feel the cold air on my face and remind myself I was still alive. I even reconnected with my younger brother, who I hadn't spoken to much since the wedding. He knew something had been wrong, but he never pushed. When I finally told him everything, he just nodded and said, "I always thought she looked past you, not at you." That hit harder than I expected, because it was true. Darla had stopped seeing me long before she ever kissed Noah, and I had made it easy, too easy, by shrinking myself down so she'd feel bigger. I thought that's what love was, but real love doesn't need you to disappear. A few days ago, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name in her handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence. "You were always better than I gave you credit for." There was no apology, no request, just that. And you know what? It was enough, because I didn't need her guilt. I had already made peace with the silence. Today, I live in a tiny apartment above a bookstore. It smells like coffee and dust and old paperbacks. And I love it. It's quiet and it's mine. I signed the final divorce papers last week, not with shaking hands, but with calm resolve. My story didn't end with betrayal. It started with it, but it ends with me choosing myself. If you followed this story all the way to the end, thank you. I hope it reminded you, no matter how invisible someone made you feel, you still exist. You still matter. You can still begin again. Now tell me, what part of the story hit you the hardest? Was it the party, the letters, or something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you would have handled it. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories, right here on Reddit Confessions.